Fruits. Tonight we're building something different, and I mean completely different, because it doesn't have tracks, armor or armament. Just a plain old military truck from MiniArt. This is gonna be my first experience with them, and when I was ordering the model, I didn't even know what the truck was supposed to be. Only later did I learn that it was a Chevrolet. So, what's with this different choice of subject and my lack of knowledge about it? Well, because I'm planning a large diorama in advance, and this truck is gonna play an important role in the story. At first glance, the kit looks very premium. The instructions are beautiful with detailed color profiles, and I'll choose the last option because I want to set the diorama somewhere in Western Europe towards the end of the war. There's a ton of plastic for such a small model, and as we'll eventually learn, half of it will be consumed by the running gear and the lower chassis. This looks like a love letter from MiniArt, and it contains a decent set of photo etch details and a metal chain, so yeah, technically it is a sign of love from the manufacturer. They also give us a figure that is posed specifically for this model, and that makes it very interesting. And also a ton of fuel drums, another nice gesture from MiniArt. Because I don't know anything about cars, and they don't resemble my usual tanks in any way, I'll play it safe and meticulously follow the instructions. The very first thing that I noticed was the soft plastic. I've read about it in the past, and it's something you have to get used to. On the other hand, it's easier on your tools, and you won't go through as many hobby blades. Also, everything is broken into small pieces, which means exquisite detail. I love how they designed their photo etch and how it's seamlessly integrated into the plastic parts. Every metal part has a groove or some kind of locating pin on the plastic, which makes precise assembly very straightforward. It's like a system of different mediums that work together like a well-lubricated machine. They even go as far as providing us with plastic bending jigs for those more complicated parts. This is something I've only seen in Tamiya kits, mainly their BT-7 tank. But hey, I didn't build every kit in the world, so maybe it's more common than I think. But it's still a very nice touch. I also assembled the entire engine, mainly because I didn't know how much of it would be visible from the bottom of the truck, but also because I was just vibing with the kit, and the simple act of assembling plastic parts together was a ton of fun. Truth be told, the only improvement I did here was drilling out the exhaust pipe with a hobby blade. Everything else is just perfect. By the time I was done with this, I was already halfway through the instructions. Yup, that's a ton of detail, but sadly, most of it will be hidden forever. Okay, the cabin is a different story, because here we actually can make a huge improvement. You see, the plastic seats are totally plain and boring. Reference images show that they were cushioned and covered with leather, and that's a much more interesting surface to work with. Don't worry, this isn't my interpretation of the thing, it's just a grippier surface for Magic Sculpt. It's a soft two-part epoxy putty ideal for jobs like this. After all, the name of the stuff should be a dead giveaway. Now, I'm no sculpting expert, but my plan was to cover the entire seat with a reasonably thick layer and sculpt some details into it. A cushion made completely out of putty would give me more room to add various contours and deep details, but this approach is more user-friendly. So after covering the entire seat with putty, I used a silicone brush to smooth out the surface and to get rid of any ugly marks made with the toothpick. Then I used a hobby blade to carve the main sewing lines. This way I was able to break the cushion into smaller areas that would be much easier to texture further. Without them, the idea of adding delicate folds to an old leather seat was just too daunting to me. Once I was done with those, I added additional seams visible in reference images from a museum. Imagine painting the seat without all of these fine surface details. As expected, it's not the best sculpting job in the world, but I think it's leagues better from the original plastic detail. It's also gonna be the biggest thing visible through the cabin windows, and now that I mention it, it's time for something highly unusual in my workflow. You see, the kit is designed in such a way that doesn't really allow you to build everything into subassemblies and then start painting. Instead, I had to move over to my painting workbench and finish the interior before proceeding any further. I mean, it's not anything unseen in the modeling world. Aircraft modelers have to paint their cockpits and then continue assembling the plane all the time. But as an armor modeler, I'm not very used to this and it felt really uncomfortable at first. My painting was very basic because most of the interior is gonna remain obscured in shadows, and I'll repeat all these steps on the outside, so for now I'll give you just a very basic rundown, okay? Post-shading was the name of the game here because strong contrast means more of your work will be visible in the end. There are also a few decals that need to be applied here, namely the dials and a few placards on the dashboard. After sealing everything with satin varnish, pin washes cranked up the contrast game to 11. I'd say it's best if you decide to overdo these effects to a point where they look a bit unnatural, but after you close the interior, everything is gonna look just right. Also, a good pin wash will do most of the heavy lifting for you. I didn't want to spend too much time with weathering, so I gave the floor a quick treatment with streaking grime, and this will emphasize the contrast and, at the same time, add some dirt accumulations. Chipping was also kept to a minimum and only around the most exposed edges. I didn't use any rust zones here because that would suggest the cab has a leaking roof or some other unpleasant issue. And then, of course, I painted all the details. I saw those shiny bolts in my references and it's a great way to bring them out. The main character of this anime is, of course, the seat. I painted a few leather surfaces already and found a color palette that works pretty well for my purposes. A very dark, black-brown undercoat is very important. The base color itself is a matter of personal style. It can be some reddish brown, blackish brown, or any kind of brown. I chose chocolate brown for this one, and for highlights I kept adding orange brown. Leather can get pretty scuffed up, so if you introduce some texture into your paint job, it's actually gonna enhance the look. You can immediately tell how the detailed surface makes painting a lot easier because there are actually some surface features that we can highlight. Pure orange brown was used for the lightest areas, but leather is awesome because it's actually shiny to some extent. As such, we can take this a step further and mix orange brown with some kind of sandy color and add those fine scratch marks and highlights around the edges. Sometimes the contrast might end up being quite overwhelming, or the paint job is not the most delicate, but glazes are there to save your day. I used a reddish brown color, diluted with about 90% water, and applied it in several controlled layers to soften the individual layers of paint. And voila! The chair is looking pretty cozy. Ideal for rainy autumn rides across the countryside. As I said, everything was kept very basic because very little was gonna be visible, and my main focus was on bringing out the individual details and contours of the cabin. So with that in mind, I could now close the cabin and glue the windshields in place. I didn't do the best job here because it's probably my first time gluing clear windows on a car, but crystal clear PVA glue from VMS did a pretty good job. And with the cabin glued to the chassis, I could add the remaining parts. The mudguards were the most problematic, but not anymore since everything else was firmly glued in place. The wheels in this kit are the coolest design. I'm no fan of rubber tires because they're a pain to clean and even worse when it comes to painting and weathering, but designing a plastic tire is not an easy job, at least from what I've seen. These are designed in such a way that no seams are gonna be visible once you glue them together, and the details on them are exquisite, down to the smallest letter. They don't have any sag though, and the easiest, although not the most convincing, way of replicating this is to sand down a small flat surface. They slide onto the hub just like in the real world, and it's gonna make their painting a lot easier. Now, I already said a bunch of good things about the photo etch in this kit, and some of it is so delicate that it's easier to bend those details into shape while they're still attached to the fret. This doesn't happen very often, and it just goes to show how much detail you're getting straight from the box. I was also very surprised that the flatbed, of all things, was the most photo edge heavy part of the model. It's not just about these tie-downs for the tarp, which are actually fully functional, but also the rear end. There's a lock, mounts for the brake lights, and chains for the tailgate. These are quite out of scale though, but I was so impressed by the kit that I didn't even want to replace them. And there was also a bit of soldering on the most complex part, the front grille cover. MiniArt actually gives us 2 of these in case we mess one up, but if you use the provided bending jigs, it should be alright on your first try. The flatbed could be theoretically kept separate for painting, but I didn't see any benefits in that. Everything that's gonna be out of sight will be painted with dark colors after all. We also get this cool little toolbox that's made out of a million pieces at least. Tamiya would probably mold it as a single part. And don't get me wrong, it would be a pleasure to work with it, but it's quite satisfying to build it up yourself, just like the real thing. With the basic construction finished, I could start laying out the cargo. I didn't want to load the front area with unnecessary stowage, which is something I love to do on my tanks. Instead, I wanted to focus on the cargo, stuff the truck would normally carry around, as that was its main objective. Well, here we're getting into the main point of this model, and the stuff in its flatbed will be directly tied with the main story of the upcoming diorama. What I'm trying to sculpt here are sacks of flour, so that should give you some hints about the scene. So if you have any ideas or suspicions about what it might be, let me know down in the comments. Also, I like to paint my stowage directly on the model because that way I can ensure it'll fit nicely in place, but this time I wanted to paint the cargo separately. So I used a lot of powder on the flatbed and sculpted the sacks on top of it. It wasn't easy because they kept moving around, but in the end I managed to do a semi-presentable job. Sacks or sandbags are not the most exciting things to sculpt or paint because if they're full, there are barely any folds in the fabric, but hey, what can you do, right? One thing I used to omit in the past was the tight ends, and it was okay for me to replicate them with a small ball of putty. But replicating them more authentically is not difficult at all. You just need to roll green stuff putty into a paper-thin tarp, then cut it into small squares and roll those up like ice cream cones. Attaching them to the sacks is not the easiest job, but the extra realism and fineness are totally worth the struggle. And because I had a lot of leftover green stuff, I added at least one obligatory tarp under a wooden crate to further personalize the model. To be honest, I didn't have much hope for my plan, but to my absolute delight, the sacks fused together with each other. And even better, they remained glued to the fuel drums. Okay, we're ready for painting, and this means more unpleasant work in the form of masking. OGs of this channel know that this is my least favorite task in the world, and I'd much rather paint everything with a brush or use decals instead of masking and spraying stuff. Sadly, I can't replicate windows with decals or brushes, or at least not for now. Anyway, painting started the same way as in the interior, or in fact, just like on any other one of my models. After washing the model in soapy water and removing any leftover dust and grease from its surface, I covered everything with a generous coat of Mr. Finishing Surfacer Black. Models with lots of complex shapes are especially good candidates for some sweet post shading, and on this one, the black primer will create lots of artificial shadows on the running gear. It also affects the upcoming layers of paint to some extent, but more on that in just a moment. I wanted to get the lower sections painted as quickly as possible because the only way to safely hold the model was with my gloved hand, and I'm not the biggest fan of that at all. When that was done, I could clamp it into my Octopus M2M painting stand and finish pretty much all of the work without even touching the model. I chose basic olive drab from the AK Real Color range, which looks quite blackish brown on this surface, but if you'd instead use a grey primer, the color would be much richer. However, that's not a concern, as I'm using it only for the gradual build-up of shadows and highlights. The next one Faded Olive Drab is probably one of my favorite paints ever because it just looks so good. It captures the dull look of olive drab, but at the same time, it's quite warm and reasonably light. If I went for a more realistic approach, this is the type of base coat I'd be comfortable with. But I like to make them as bright as possible because all the upcoming techniques, no matter how controlled and subtle, will make the model look a few levels darker. As such, I kept adding small quantities of buff from Tamiya into the faded olive drab, and I sprayed these highlights towards the top and around all those exposed edges or raised details. Airbrushing subtle color gradients is also a great way to add visual interest to these large, smooth surfaces where your weathering options are quite limited. There are quite a few markings on this vehicle, and thankfully, MiniArt decals are extremely thin and well printed. Because I added a large amount of clear from Tamiya into each paint mixture, the surface of my model was glossy and it accepted the decals really well. I really appreciate those that are dedicated to all the fuel drums that we're getting with the kit, and I'm putting the unused ones in my spares for future projects. So, when I was done with the base coat and markings, I covered everything with a few generous coats of VMS satin varnish. Usually I use a flat coat, but this time I wanted the smooth, curvy shapes of the truck to reflect some light under certain angles. If you'd like to try it out, or my favorite flat varnish, you can snatch them through one of the links in the video description, and if you use my promo codes, you'll get a small discount on your order. Removing masks is like unwrapping presents. It just makes you feel giddy, right? I didn't do the greatest job because there were some unsightly flakes of built-up paint around window frames, but it wasn't anything serious. In fact, all of these were easily removed with a dry, stiff paintbrush. And any other imperfections can be smoothed out with washes, chipping, and other cheat codes. So here we have it, all painted up, unmasked, and ready for weathering. You can barely see a little bit of shine on the surface because the VMS satin varnish is very subtle, but it's just enough to make a difference. Okay, now we're getting to the most pleasant part of the entire painting process. Applying a pin wash over a post-shaded surface, or you know what, over any kind of surface that's not just a single monotone color. So this applies to a model treated with hairspray chipping. Well, it's just awesome, right? Because it's like taking an interesting but blurry picture and enhancing the sharpness. In the past, when I didn't post-shade my models, the wash actually made the model look very sterile and artificial, and I had to rely on oil paints to further enhance the surface and blend those contrasts back a little. But if you play with that contrast with an airbrush, you can skip oil paints altogether. Also, I was recently ordering some basic enamel washes from AK because my old bottles were running out. And they sent me these new ones, and I really like the dark umber that I'm using on this model. I mean, it probably doesn't matter if you're using dark umber or dark brown wash for green vehicles, right? But this one specifically is a very nice universal color for green finishes, and probably other ones that I haven't tried out yet. Also, as you probably know, I'm sponsored by AK Interactive. I chose them because I love their products and they're a cool bunch of people. And if you like their stuff as well and want to help me out, you can shop on their website through my affiliate link in the video description, and even get a nice discount if you use my promo code. So with that out of the way, let's stare at the model with only one simple weathering technique applied, and how it ties the whole paint job together. I said it multiple times, but if you like clean looking models, this is where you could stop and end up with a very nice result. But because I like to give my models as much character as possible, or just plainly have as much fun with the model as I can, let's push on with some chipping. For this paint job, I had to mix my own chipping color from black and red brown. I really like red brown as a universal chipping color because it looks like dark metal with a slight hint of corrosion, but it didn't really work on this faded olive drab. I used it on the interior and the contrast just wasn't what I was looking for, so I had to mix roughly 3 drops of red brown with 2 drops of black. And of course, I added 3 drops of paint drying retarder and 1 drop of tap water. I like adding a lot of wear to my armor models, but I wanted to keep the chipping on this truck more subdued. At least on the cabin, because after all, even if it went through a fruitful service life, it definitely wasn't exposed to the same conditions as tanks on the front lines. Well, I mean, it depends, right? The flatbed is really the business end of this model, and if it carried heavy loads made from hard materials such as fuel drums, there's bound to be some serious wear on that olive paint. I guess hairspray chipping would have been more efficient here, but then again, I couldn't use post shading. You just can't have both, so you have to win some and then lose some. Or maybe you can, and I just didn't try it out yet. I went easy on the interior and didn't add any rust effects, but that definitely wasn't going to be the case on the outside of the truck. Chipping and subtle rust effects complement each other like bread and butter, and there are some paint jobs, olive drab included, that work really well with rust zones. I like to use oil paints for this, especially dark rust and oxide patina from 502 Abteilung. They have light rust in their selection, but I like oxide patina much more because it's more vivid. I use Manger's White Spirit for blending on all my enamel or oil paints, and it's a regular hardware store thinner, nothing model specific. It's a more economical solution, but then again, it's much hotter than purpose-made thinners for scale modelers, so you have to do some testing before you accidentally melt the paint job on your model. At this point, the model is becoming much richer, because so far it was only about olive drab and some blackish brown weathering effects, so I'm glad we're finally introducing some color in the form of rust effects. Up next are the various surface details, and let's start with the trickiest one, the back view mirror. I have this basic punch and die set from a hardware store, again, and luckily one had almost the same diameter as the mirror. Self-adhesive chrome foil isn't the same as a mirror foil, but because I have to make this detail like once every 10 years or so, it's good enough for me. It's quick, clean, and doesn't look bad at all. Engineering tools on US vehicles are tricky as well, because you see, they were all painted with olive drab, but that's just so boring, right? We can paint them like that and add some subtle wood and steel chipping to make them look used. Or we can go the most complicated way as I did and actually paint them as old tools with their raw materials. I painted the steel parts with medium and light gray acrylic paints and then gave them a controlled wash from the same rusty oil paints I used just a moment ago. This leads to some exciting results, right? The wooden handles were base coated with British khaki, and I gave them some very basic wood grain texture with light earth. I'd pay more attention here if I wasn't going to cover it all up. So yeah, now I just had to paint the remnants of olive drab, mixed from AK 3rd generation acrylics, and I went for a really worn look because I wanted to show off those raw materials underneath. It's a small area filled with interesting textures, so I wanted to make the most out of it. The same enamel wash was used as well, but I blended it differently, to sort of simulate some grime from dirty hands and to add contrast between the tools and the various clamps and straps. The rest was just about painting the belts in a nice contrasty leather color, and this area of the model was finished. Wheels, or at least in their basic form, were really simple. I just painted the tires with rubber black, a perfect color for this type of surface, and then I picked out the bolts with a shiny aluminum paint to make them look worn down from frequent maintenance. While I had that shiny paint in my palette, I painted the reflective elements on the flatbed and gave each a drop of Tamiya clear red. Okay, now we're actually moving on to the stowage and cargo, because I like to paint them right along with the details that are a part of the vehicle itself. I have 2 wooden crates on this model, and I painted them using the same methods as I've shown you on the tool handles. Of course, they have much bigger surfaces, and that means they deserve more attention, so I played around with different glazes on top of the wood grain texture. Diluted brown, reddish brown, and even frog green for some mossy accumulations to really give them a bit of age. Black-brown dirt stains can be also blended in the corners and towards the bottom to add some extra volume to these otherwise flat surfaces. And small visual touches such as emphasizing the nails in the wood are really gonna make them stand out on the model. I could have given them a splash of paint, let's say some vivid green or something else, but this time I wanted to have some fun with faded wood textures. For fuel drums, I wanted to try a very different painting approach. You see, I originally treated them with the same dark pin wash, but that made them look really artificial looking and just dark and boring. So I went over each one with several layers of diluted acrylic paint, basically a lighter version of the base coat, and then continued with more acrylic washes. Now, the paint selection depends on what type of weathering you want to add. On the green and greasy barrel I used a sandy color, and on the rest I went with bright orange rusty colors. I had a bunch of reference images in front of me, and I just tried to interpret what I was seeing in them. For example, instead of outlining the lettering with a dark wash, I painted each letter with a dark brown steel color, just like in real life. In fact, painting every protruding edge with a chipping color is all you're gonna need, and if you think about it, we're basically reversing the contrast game. Light colored wash in the recessed areas and a dark dry brush on the exposed edges. Of course, I went back with the pin wash and added some missing contrast in a few places, especially under the largest rungs, and I also used it to simulate the sticky grime at the top. Rusty oil paints are great for adding depth around those worn edges, but also as a complementary color to that light colored acrylic rust we just added. Again, the colors and effects greatly depend on what type of look you're trying to replicate, but the bottom line is, it's a refreshing exercise and a nice break from the usual weathering methods. Now I could mask them off and pre-shade the flour sacks. I kept them black this whole time, so now I could gently spray some diluted deck tan from above, following the natural direction of light. Now that I'm looking back at my actions, they looked quite alright as they were with just the basic pre-shading. Because flour sacks are just usually white or something similar, but of course I wanted to make them look more interesting. Not only by giving each one of them a slightly different color, but also by emphasizing the shadows and highlights. Because if you spend time sculpting all those delicate folds and seam lines, why not make them clearly visible? I used way too many color combinations to remember them all, but the basic approach was the same. Give them a glaze with some sandy, brownish or tan color, then enhance the shadows with the diluted black-brown paint, and then paint highlights in several layers, always by adding light earth and pure white into the base color, until you end up with the most extreme lights on top of each sack. If nothing else, it's a great practice because we don't paint these organic shapes very often on military models. So, that's all our details ready to be attached to the model, my friends. I use super glue for that, and it really pays off if you can glue these small piles of stuff into larger sub-assemblies such as here. Before I attached the cargo though, I quickly blended that black-brown acrylic paint over the flat bit, just to give it some artificial shadow, but hey, it can work as a large stain of grime if you want it to be that. And there we go. It fits like a Lego block. Okay, so with all these elements in place, the model slowly starts to click together. There's enough color variety thanks to the rusty flatbed and the cargo on it, but let's not forget some of the smaller details, such as the red tarp on the fender. All we need to do now is to add some subtle artifacts on the lower portions. My preferred way of doing these kind of things is to start with acrylics. Normally, I commence the task by stippling a bit of acrylic mud from AK, but I didn't want to have any heavy mud accumulations on this model, so I jumped right into the pre-dusting stage, which is, by definition, just spraying some very diluted Tamiya buff color in places where those dirt accumulations should be. It's a base coat that's gonna stay in place no matter how much blending you do later, and also a roadmap for all your upcoming steps. I really like to work with enamel paints when it comes to these effects, and this time I was able to try something that I didn't ask for, but AK was kind enough to send it over anyway. Enamel pigments. Well, they might sound the same as enamel paints, but they're not. They're dark when in liquid form, and when they dry, they become much lighter. They also have an extremely flat, gritty texture. However, I find them quite unpredictable, just like dry pigments, but they work well enough on extremely dirty areas such as wheels, lower hulls or tracks. With a bit of practice, they might work on upper areas too, but I don't have enough mileage on them to do that. However, as you already saw, they accept additional effects really well, and it's my standard procedure to add some richness with darker earth tones, which don't have to necessarily represent mud or damp earth, just a different tone of earth. It's also a good idea to dry brush the contact area with the original rubber black acrylic paint, especially when the vehicle is driving on asphalt, concrete or a cobblestone road. So what do you think? This is my second attempt at rubber wheels. The first one was a year ago on the Toyota Land Cruiser. They're really fun to paint, I can tell you that much. Earth effects are like Marvel movies. You see one, you've seen them all. The technique and the paints are always the same. Well, there might be a few differences though. For example, here I employed some enamel Africa dust effects and speckled them on the liquid pigment to blend the harsh transitions and to add some nice visual texture. The rest was the same, a darker color, its name is Earth Effects just to make it all more confusing, and finally a dark wash for grime and moisture. I was very generous on the mechanical parts which are heavily lubricated and also tend to leak a little. This 3-stage system where you start with a dry dust tone and work your way towards dark stains of moisture is very fun, and the results are always very pleasing to look at. Even if you apply them very sparingly, they can greatly enhance the overall look of the model. So I could happily superglue the wheels in place, and these make the model look more complete because all of these earth effects click together, just as we experienced with the cargo and stowage. Now I just had to add some of them on the upper portions, but in very, very subtle amounts. The flatbed is a nice smooth surface where I could play around with different textures, and I decided to dust off these silicone boot prints from caliber 35. The last time I used them was on my 3-inch gun carrier, and that was a long time ago. And let's not forget we have flour sacks in there, so I added a bit of flour with pure white acrylic paint. I kept it subtle because, after all, I wasn't building Pablo Escobar's truck. Anyway, my friends, this is another one of those full, and I mean totally full, build videos from start to finish. Softskin vehicles on wheels are a completely different kind of modeling subject, and I've only built 2 so far. It's a nice change of things, but I'm starting to feel like they're not really my cup of tea. That of course doesn't mean I won't build any more in the future, it's just that I don't enjoy them as much as armor. But the striker on 8 wheels, well, that's something I can imagine enjoying. So to sum it all up, I bought this model specifically for the upcoming diorama. It wasn't like my usual stuff when I'm interested in a specific subject and then I designed the diorama around it. With this one, the diorama idea came first, and then I chose the best model for the story. Remember that the kit comes with a driver's figure, and it's gonna fit the scenery perfectly, so I'll try to make the best out of it, even though I'm a spoiled figure painter and so far I've only painted resin ones. So what do you think about the result, my friends? I guess a more subtle approach to weathering isn't a bad idea from time to time, and I feel that it fits the truck really well. So I'm gonna get back to work because it's gonna be a huge diorama. In the meantime, I want to sincerely thank every single one of you for watching these videos, because if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be here building models for a living, and I can't thank you enough for this amazing opportunity. All of this is also possible thanks to my incredible patrons. My whole Patreon page is like a Night Shift magazine subscription, as I post there pretty often with updates from my workbench. We can get in touch through DMs, comments and emails. I'm posting 1 week early ad-free videos, and those stay there forever, so you can always get back to them without even keeping track of these official uploads on my channel. I also have some small extra goodies such as 3D models which you can download and print for your own projects, a bunch of real-life references for nature, old buildings and so on. And last but not least, these high-resolution studio photos which show the model in more detail than video ever could. It would help me a lot, but hey, no pressure. Anyway, my friends, I've heard and read a lot about MiniArt kits and how they're the definition of ultimate detail, and after this model, I have to agree. They're amazing and well engineered, but one thing that keeps at least this one from excellence is the fact that you'd need to build it twice to build it perfectly. You know what I mean? You'd need prior experience with the kit and know all its nuances to assemble it without a hitch. Well, at least that's my takeaway. What are your experiences with these newer MiniArt kits? Let me know, and in the meantime, stay safe, stay awesome, build your models, don't just collect them, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers!